A few months ago, Labour took aim at government largesse by publishing a dossier of, quote, five-star spending by ministers and civil servants. The dossier even had its own website. Those documents revealed how Rishi Sunak stayed in the five-star Hotel Daniele in Venice when attending a G20 meeting in 2021. Between him and 11 aides, the bill for that came to £4,500. Also identified was how, at COP26 in Glasgow that same year, the Treasury hired a £3,600 chauffeur service for ministers and visiting officials. The same chauffeur service was hired by Nadhim Zahawi's department for £1,000 during his own trip to COP26. Liz Truss, along with her entourage, spent £1,400 on lunch and dinner at 2 restaurants in Jakarta in November that same year, and the Foreign Office spent thousands on a reception for the then Foreign Secretary overlooking Sydney Harbour. At the time, Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner said the Tories were treating taxpayers like a cash machine, and Labour's official line was that the Tories were acting as if it were, quote, the last days of Rome. And just last month, Keir Starmer said, quote, with my Labour government, every pound will be precious. Powerful stuff. But it turns out that Keir Starmer might not be the best messenger for all of this, because during his time as Director of Public Prosecutions from 2008 until 2013, Keir Starmer benefited from similarly generous expenses he now presumably thinks were wasteful and unacceptable. The website Declassified UK reports this. Starmer's total travel bill for the time in charge of the DPP, that should say CPS, he was the DPP, that's the Crown Prosecution Service, stood at £236,485, which funded first or business class flights to 4 continents, including a £6,808 flight to Washington, D.C., and a £4,914 flight to Hong Kong. In his first 21 months in the job, he also billed £161,000 for the use of a chauffeur-driven car. At the time, Starmer lived in Kentish Town, 4 miles from the CPS office in central London. Starmer's on-demand car cost the taxpayer an average £1,920 a week for nearly 2 years. While he had access to the car, he billed the taxpayer a further £330 for 13 taxi rides across London. Now, you might be thinking, that's a lot of money, but the private car is necessary, Aaron. But wait, there's more. Because Declassified go on to say, quote, that Starmer stopped using the car in June 2010, soon after an embarrassing story broke in the media. So we did some digging here at Novara Live, and here's the story. Chief Prosecutor claims £250 a day for a chauffeur-driven car. The country's chief prosecutor is claiming more than £250 a day in expenses for a chauffeur-driven car. It has been disclosed. That was on the Telegraph, as you can see, in February 2010. So Starmer needed a chauffeur so much that when the media found out what was happening, he stopped using it and proceeded to suddenly not need one for the remaining 3 years he served as the DPP. And on this point, Declassified adds even more remarkable detail. Starmer's successor as DPP was Alison Saunders, who served the same 5-year term from 2013 to 2018. Her travel expenses bill from her tenure was £67,340, less than a third of Starmer's. So Keir Starmer happily used expenses as much as any Tory minister who he now attacks, and stopped when he was caught. Then his successor spent significantly less, but this guy wants to be Prime Minister because he'll get value for money. He doesn't exactly have a strong record on that issue, does he? Ash, this story has really landed. It's in the Times, the Telegraph, the Mail, everywhere else. And I guess the central reason for that is that Keir Starmer chose to make expenses an issue, and now he's got egg on his face.
Well, that's the thing about Keir Starmer, which is he has made the decision as Labour Party leader to primarily attack the Conservatives on matters of probity, integrity, and personal conduct. So when it comes to matters of policy, there's not a huge amount of difference between them. But when it's come to things like the handling of the Chris Pincher complaints or Partygate or use of taxpayer-funded expenses, that's been where Keir Starmer has chosen to put distance between himself and the Conservative Party. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, unless you have something of a bit of a past when it comes to making, quite outlandish expenses claims. And I think the fact that Keir Starmer's successor spent only a third of what he did on travel shows you that he could have been, more respectful, more discerning, a bit more restrained when it came to use of taxpayer money. I think this is something which goes to the heart of Keir Starmer's character as a man, because really there are two Starmers. There's the Starmer who really likes to emphasize his humble, salt of the earth roots. So my father was a tool maker. I bought this plot of land so that my mother could look at the donkeys. And I'm not saying those things are untrue. Of course, they're factually true, and they must be a really important part of how he derives his identity. But there is another part of his identity which is really motivated by status. It's really motivated by the pursuit of status and those signs of being someone who's considered really important. You can see that by the fact anyone who accepts a knighthood because they want people to call him sir, that's somebody who's interested in quite shallow, I think, signifiers of status. Someone who wants to be driven around in a chauffeur-driven car when your job is in central London, you live basically in central London, and getting the tube and the occasional cab won't kill you. That's somebody who is motivated by status, by feeling important. And that's the kind of person, I think, who won't always make good judgments when it comes to what's a good use of public money and what isn't. And also keeping their nose clean in all those matters of personal conduct that he's chosen to attack the Tories on.
I think this is so important because people might be watching this and saying, don't attack Labour, or this is normal for the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, even though we just showed you that his successor spent a third as much. But Keir Starmer chose to go on value for money in the public sector. He chose to do this against the Tories. Labour in February literally built a website calling out Tory largesse and saying they spent too much money. And this is the same man who in his first 21 months in the job as DPP billed £161,000 for a chauffeur. £161,000 in 21 months. Now, if you had that in your past, if that was what you were doing 10 years ago, would you then go and attack your opponents on value for money? It seems both politically unwise, but also, like you say, Ash, it goes to the core of who is this guy? Does he think he can attack other people, but somehow those attacks won't be reciprocated? Why? Is he special? Maybe he thinks he's got some special qualities which mean he's beyond reproach. And he is very thin-skinned when he comes under attacks. And I wonder what explains that.